All right, welcome back. Today we're diving into something huge. We're going to look at the work of W. Schmidt and ask a pretty wild question. How do you take something as personal, as powerful as religion, and study it like a science? Let's see how he tried to build a kind of science of the soul.
I mean, that's the big problem, right? It sounds impossible. How can you use cold, hard, scientific methods on something so personal? Something that's all about faith in the soul. But, way back, almost a century ago, a scholar actually set out to write the rule book for doing exactly that.
And here it is. The foundational text for our whole discussion today is The Origin and Growth of Religion from back in 1931. And right in Chapter 1, the author, W. Schmidt, he lays out his big idea, a new field he called the comparative history of religion. Now, he knew this was going to be a tough sell, a really difficult task, but he was convinced it was absolutely essential.
Okay, so what exactly was this new science? I mean, what did it look like in practice? Schmidt wasn't just, collecting cool stories or comparing different myths. No, he was trying to do something much bigger. He wanted to build an entire discipline from scratch, with its own rules, its own methods, everything.
See, before Schmidt came along, studying religion was kind of a mess. A chaotic mix of philosophy, psychology, a lot of pure guesswork. Schmidt's goal was to cut through all that noise. He wanted to create a real, systematic way to understand religion, not as some abstract idea, but how it actually exists and grows in the real world.
And the name he came up with, it actually tells you everything you need to know. Comparative History of Religion. Yeah, I know, it sounds super academic, a little dry maybe, but once you break it down, you realize it's basically a roadmap for his entire method. So let's do that. Let's break it down. There are basically 3 pillars to this whole thing. First up, you've got to define religion. I mean, what are we even talking about here? Second, it has to be comparative. You can't just look at one religion by itself. You have to look at them all together to spot the bigger patterns. And finally, and this is the really big one, it has to be based on history, real, actual history, facts, events, things you can prove. And Schmidt was super precise with his definition. For him, religion wasn't just, believing in something bigger. No, it was about a relationship with one or more transcendental, meaning, beyond our physical world. And this is the key word, personal. Everything hangs on that one word, personal. And think about it, that makes sense, right? You can't have a back and forth, a reciprocal relationship with something like gravity or some vague idea like the universe. Schmidt's point is that for something to count as a religion, for his purposes anyway, it has to involve a conscious, personal being, something you can actually interact with. And boom, right there, he sets a very clear boundary for what he's going to study.
Okay, so this focus on historical facts, on what actually happened, it forced Schmidt to draw a really important line in the sand. He argued that his science of religion is absolutely not psychology. And he believed that confusing those two things had led to some pretty massive mistakes in the past.
And he lays out the difference so clearly. He says, look, a psychologist can sit in a room and theorize about all the possible ways the human brain could cook up religious ideas. That's their job, to map out the possibilities. But the historian, their job is to get out there and find out what actually happened. What did people really do and believe in a specific place at a specific time? So you see the difference? Psychology is about what could be, but history is about what was. And this isn't just academic hair-splitting. This distinction is a huge deal. Schmidt basically calls out a whole group of thinkers, he calls them the evolutionist school, for making this exact mistake. What they did was they took a psychological theory, the idea that humans evolved from simple to complex, and they just slapped it onto religion. They just assumed that the oldest religions must have been primitive, maybe even bestial and ugly, as he puts it. They didn't have any historical proof. They just figured it had to be that way, because it fit their model.
All right, so we've established it's not psychology. But then Schmidt goes a step further. He says it's not philosophy either. And that opens up a whole other can of worms and a much trickier question.
Because think about it. If your job as a historian is just to describe the facts, what do you do with your own beliefs? I mean, it doesn't matter if you're a devout believer or a hardcore atheist. Isn't your own point of view going to color how you see things? How can you ever be truly objective?
And what I love about Schmidt's answer is how honest and modern it is. He just says flat out, nope, you can't. He says, absolute freedom from preconceived ideas is beyond any man's power. Basically, perfect objectivity is a fantasy. Everyone, and he really emphasizes everyone, brings their own baggage, their own perspective to the table. The goal isn't to pretend you're a blank slate. You're not.
So what do? Well, you have to navigate this problem carefully. He says, the historian's job is to report the facts, not to pass judgment on whether a religion is true or not. And he sees dangers on both sides of the coin. A non-believer, he says, might be like a blind man trying to describe colors. They just can't grasp the inner experience. But a believer who gets it from the inside, they run the risk of being biased in favor of their own faith. So what's the answer? The solution, he says, is a ruthless commitment to your method and, this is key, being totally open to frank criticism from other people, especially people who disagree with you.
So let's step back for a second. If you can't just apply a simple psychological theory, and you can't ever be perfectly objective, what's the point of all this? What is the ultimate goal for the historian of religion? What are they even trying to do?
And here's the payoff, and it's actually really beautiful. The whole point isn't to stand on the sidelines and judge religion from a distance. The point is to jump right in, to, as he says, plunge into the flowing stream of events. You have to get into the messy, complicated reality of human history to see how religion is actually lived, how it grows, how it changes things. According to Schmidt, that's the only way you can even begin to grasp the full reality of what religion is. And that leaves us with a really fascinating question to chew on. Schmidt gives us this amazing blueprint for studying religion from the outside as a historian. But he also admits that there's an inside view, the one that a believer has. And that tension is still at the absolute heart of studying faith today. So can you really truly understand a religion just by looking at the historical facts from the outside? Or is there a part of it, an entire dimension, that's just locked away unless you have belief yourself? Definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining me for this one. We'll see you next time.